Language, Culture and Thought. Introduction. The relationship between language, culture and thought has perplexed many people from many different disciplines for many years. The question of whether language influences the way we see the world and whether the world is limited by the language we use has been variously debated, supported and unproved by philosophers such as Wilhelm von Humboldt, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and linguists such as Benjamin Lee Whorf, Edward Sapir, Steven Pinker, and Noam Chomsky. However, unless we actually speak German as it relates to Austria and German culture, how can we truly understand what the aforementioned philosophers were trying to convey? Although most people believe that on some level, language and culture form a close relationship, there are varying beliefs about whether 1. Culture derives language, 2. Language drives culture, or 3. Language and culture influence each other. It seems it is most likely that language, culture and thought form the 3 strands of Betty Berner's proverbial braid. Each one affects the others. The ability to create and use language differentiates humans from other animates. A learned, not innate quality, language is taught to us mostly by our family and others within our narrow world initially and wider world later on. Therefore, we develop a sense of our culture from an early age from the use of language. Without language, however, cultural ideas would not be able to be transmitted, and the transmission of culture can be influenced and altered by language. Anthropologist Ward Goodenough's definition of culture inextricably links language with culture, most particularly in his statement that culture is the forms of things that people have in mind. They're models for perceiving, relating, and otherwise interpreting them. Language is present in all of these actions. Furthermore, like language, Goodenough describes culture as something you have to learn. As a result, both language and culture rely on the teacher or teachers and the circumstances relating to the world around them. The question then is, what comes first, the language or the culture? It is a little bit like the chicken and egg phenomenon. Therefore, it is likely that language and culture influence each other, just like the chicken and the egg. Moreover, when culture, or the ways of things change, so will the language of this culture. If a language is lost, so will its culture. This is especially highlighted in Australian Aboriginal contexts. The chicken and the egg. According to Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and Mormon faith, the story of the Tower of Babel explains the origins of the multiplicity of languages. God was concerned that humans had too much freedom to do as they wished, so God brought into existence multiple languages. We can assume that from this story, language came both before, by the naming of Adam, and after culture. In northwest Arnhem Land, the first human to enter the land was Warramunungi. She travelled the area, putting different children into different areas and telling them which language they will speak. In Ramingining, in the Northern Territory, the Wagalak sisters created the landscape, the languages, and the laws at the same time. In many other cultures, there are stories regarding the divine creation of languages. However, there is also a competing hypothesis based on natural evolution. According to this hypothesis, as soon as humans developed the biological or neurological capacity for language, the cultural development of forms with meanings would have been the next step. Whatever came first, whether it be from divine creation or evolution, since then we have seen significant cultural and linguistic evolution. However, not all languages have evolved at the same rate. In general, human evolution has been a combination of intense interplay between our hardware, or genes and physiology, and our software, our language and culture. Evans uses the analogy of computer technology. Advances in hardware and software constantly spur each other on, neither of which control the other. New software requires new hardware, and new hardware requires new software. Consider the example of text language. The cultural shift from talking on the telephone to texting has come about due to changes in society and new technology. However, the introduction of text language has made this medium even more popular due to the speed of conveying messages. Furthermore, this vernacular is making its way into everyday spoken language, which makes me want to LOL. Therefore, as we experience changes in culture, we see changes in languages and vice versa. Pictures in the mind. Much of the early research pertaining to the relationship between language and culture was carried out by two German philosophers, Wilhelm von Humboldt and Ludwig Wittgenstein. However, unless you have a good understanding of the German language, which I obviously don't, and German and Austrian culture during the 1830s and early 1900s, then like many others who have tried to translate their works to English with meaning, you may not appreciate the full meaning. Wittgenstein claimed the meaning of a word was in its use. According to Hacker, it is the way that you say it and the context in which you say it, not what you say. Therefore, Wittgenstein's famous quote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world," may be actually perceived in a number of ways depending on its use. Possibly the German may convey more meaning. Die Grenzen meiner Sprache bedeuten die Grenzen meiner Welt. Therefore, to understand change, one needs to understand the cultural context in which it is spoken and the cultural sensitivities pertaining to the way it is said. A change in the use of language and the way it is said will be directly related to a change in culture. Furthermore, a change in the use and meaning of language will result in a change in culture. Humboldt believed that language was not a fixed system. Through his research on the Kawi language, Humboldt found that language is a living organism, a form of energy which changes, develops, and also in some cases degenerates in the course of people's evolution. Therefore, Humboldt acknowledged that as culture changed, so too does language. Both of these early thinkers suggested that the influence of language is not what we can think about or even what we do think about, but more particularly on how we break up our own reality into categories and pictures and label them. Therefore, our language and our thoughts are probably both influenced significantly by culture. Losing and finding culture. Language is a form to meet the needs of our cultural and social situation. Every individual and culture in the history of our race places its own mark upon this world. That was a quote by Everett. This diversity of languages is a key element in the survival of the human race, as languages express the collective wisdom of our species that cannot be fully translated from one language to another. Therefore, to lose a language is to lose wisdom relating to the environment around us. In the Australian Aboriginal context, the loss of a language has led to a loss of culture, a loss of identity, and a loss of respect. It can mean a break in connection to laws, land, and ancestors. It can mean the total breaking of a people. The House Standing Committee on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs, in its inquiry into language learning in Indigenous communities, found that language is inseparable from culture, kinship, land, and family. It is the foundation upon which the capacity to learn, interact, and to shape identity is built. Therefore, as language is lost, so too are these other important aspects of life. Referenced in the parliamentary paper was a quote from Galawinku man Yurunjil Durkai. Our language is like a pearl inside a shell. The shell is like the people that carry the language. If our language is taken away, then that would be like a pearl that is gone. We would be like an empty oyster shell. Interestingly, the quote is in English. However, throughout Australia and other parts of the world, endangered languages are increasingly being recorded and revived. Hebrew, Welsh, and Maori have all been revitalised, and as part of language generation, there has also been cultural and identity revitalisation. In Australia, although many languages have been lost, some Aboriginal people have been able to maintain their identity through creation of a new language, Creole. The actor, Tommy Lewis, who grew up speaking Creole at Roper River Station, also known as Nooka, said, "We're proud to speak Creole, but it kind of backfired because our traditional language is gone." However, even though Creole is sometimes referred to as a language killer, the real killer is colonisation, and Creole is a lifeboat for culture and identity. Conclusion. Neither language, culture, and thought are static. Their dynamic nature makes us question who we are and remodel and refine this information from one generation to the next. However, language is also able to carry forward important information from history. It can help unlock ancient scripts, and it can, according to Evans, shape and sharpen the ways of thought that give each culture a different set of insights into the nature of time, space, events, and social reality. Goodenough said that linguistics has been described as the best instrument for getting inside the human skin. As language is both a part of and an instrument for learning culture, they are continually influencing the other. The dying languages of the world have highlighted the importance of retaining language for cultural, environmental, and survival of our species reasons. Given the enormity of the world and the complex systems within it, it is not feasible to expect that a super language or lingua franca can meet all our needs. The diversity of our languages remind us that there are alternative ways of doing, living, and being in the world, and without them, significant cultural information would be lost.